Now, it seems to me
Mm.
that going back to what I was saying before about the fundamental problem with the left and the right today, the right doesn't deliver on its core promise of security. The left doesn't deliver on its core promise of inclusivity. I find a very interesting way in which these two come together, which provides, I think, a very good small c conservative argument for libertarian socialism or a more direct democracy, which is the fact that it seems to be necessary for the rule of law to survive. People can Rule of law sounds like a bit of a fancy idea, but what it really means is that you and I, irrespective of, it's quite an egalitarian idea, irrespective of our status, ideally, we ought to be held by the same norms and standards, given the same fair due process and representation in front of the law. Now, the kind of neoliberal capitalism we're living under now, especially with the rise of AI, has the most profound threats to this most basic norm. You could call it the norm at the heart of the modern West, if you like, or at least it's supposed to be that. And not just in Trump refusing to acknowledge he lost an election, but in everything from how our data is expropriated by big tech to how those very same corporations that are expropriating our data en masse and without consent and in collaboration with the state are taking vast amounts of money every time there's a crisis, like in 2020, to do share buybacks, buying their own shares, and having mergers and acquisitions on unprecedented scale. This is a threat. It's not just a threat to democracy or equality. You don't have to be left wing at all to realize this is a threat to the very integrity of the system and a threat to what every person who is risk averse or conservative temperamentally ought to take most seriously, which is the rule of law and principles like due process. Again, think about the kind of the cancel culture and scandalizing on the internet. That is not due process. And you can't scapegoat this on the left because the left has not created these big tech platforms. The left has not created this situation of this cozy relationship between the state and these big tech platforms. The left are precisely the ones like yourself who are writing these most incisive critiques of these, whether it's you or Grace Blakely or Yanis Varoufakis, the most substantive critiques of these big tech platforms and what Varoufakis calls techno-feudalism is coming precisely from the left. So we can't be scapegoated for whatever maladies left liberal culture might be throwing up in the present. Speaking of Varoufakis, he mentioned that he said quite aptly, I think, that the left has never been more needed than it is now and never been more useless.
Mm.
And I think one potential
Yeah.
solution to that, which I think smart contracts, a focus on smart contracts and blockchain can really help with, is to shift the conversation away a little bit from the old liberal versus left argument ground. Because interestingly, this left liberal division fits exactly onto the intergenerational divide. If you look at what's the greatest predictor of if you're voting left or center, whether it's in the France or the UK, it's age. Increasingly,
Mm.
the two elections involving Corbyn in 2017, 2019, age was a better predictor than class, which is very interesting. And it speaks to a number of issues, including our perspective on history compared with our parents' generation's perspective on history, but also this awareness of technology and climate and other things. Anyway, that's a big old list. But what I'm saying is, even if you put aside, we can say, look, you liberals, you centrists, you care about things like consumer choice and efficiency and rationality and abstractly conceived. We care about things like democracy, fairness, justice. We care about each other's value, but you tend to care more about yours. We tend to care about more about ours. Put those differences to a side a little bit and say, actually, democratization of society is not just good for fairness or something like that. It's also an important security priority because the rule of law is undermined by this unprecedented market concentration. The fact that we have these corporations getting all this free money from governments, buying back their own shares, not even using workers to produce their wealth, but using algorithms to produce their wealth. This political power these companies have is a threat to the rule of law. It's a threat to democracy. It's a threat to the fundamental liberal institutions. And so we are faced with automation as a consequence of AI. That's unavoidable. But we have to choose whether we go in a technocratic direction or a more directly democratic direction. And I think a very small c conservative liberal argument can be made that if we go down a technocratic direction, it will further empower these corporations, which will not just have a bad impact on climate, not just be bad for marginalized minorities, not just be bad for democracy in general, but specifically present systemic risks and undermining the rule of law. And I think that that as a focus to bring more centrist inclined people, more progressive inclined people together on a shared focus could be very positive. Because I really do think you cannot care at all about fairness. You cannot want to live in a more democratic society and still see the logic from, if security is your core concern, you're more temperamentally conservative. I still think there's a strong argument that democratization of society along the lines which the libertarian left has always advocated can be seen as a security necessity, especially with the rise of AGI and with the resource scarcity happening as a consequence of climate change. So that was a lot, but I just wanted to put all that on the table because this is one of the reasons why I think, and why I'm so unhappy with Kurzweil. One of the reasons I think smart contracts will become the talk of the town in the next 5 to 10 years, and why the rule of law crisis will supplant the climate crisis and the AI crisis as the unifying meta crisis, if you will. I think the rule of law on a universal level, as much as in your country of residence as in mine, is under unique and unprecedented threat. And liberals can't pretend that market power and unprecedented wealth and income inequality and concentration of market power is not a huge factor in that anymore. They just can't pretend it. They see it with these controversies to do with big tech, and they see it with the inadequate response to the 2020 crisis and how this has continued the trends established in 2008, and they see it in how this is leading to the rise of the far right in France, in Italy. In Italy, by the way, 100 years to the month from Mussolini's march on Rome in 1922, they elected the direct successor to the Italian Fascist Party, with Mussolini's own grandchildren getting in on the action. Yeah. To avoid history repeating itself in that direction, I think it's important for the left to realize its indebtedness to the principle of the rule of law, and for the liberals to recognize their indebtedness to the left for understanding that equality or democracy is not just about fairness, it's also about security and about due process and foundational liberal institutions and values which they most care about. So I just wanted to invite you to reflect on that.
No, I think the yeah, maybe liberals owe the left in actually testing those theories and that they hold so dear, concepts that they hold so dear. And history at various moments have shown that plenty of liberals didn't actually care, or didn't actually make the behavior to show that they cared about the things that they say that they care about, as far as rule of law and due process and all that, and just the constant targeting of the left throughout history for various reasons. There is, on one side, people can complain the left has become kind of milquetoast and whatever through this time, through the degradation of the traditionally left institutions, but also at the same time there has been an explicit effort, since the end of World War II, to destroy, slowly chip away at whatever left institutions were there at the time. It's just now been so many decades where we've lost so much of it, and the liberals have been winning the kind of access to power and access to, I think, dominant ideology within the political economic system in a way that we just have not been able to recover from since. Especially
to be clear, I'm referring to the voters of these parties more so than the actual ideologues.
Yeah, fair. And I think, of course, voters have been tricked into thinking that their interest lies in these more centrist or right-wing parties in a way that they have then again been tricked into thinking that it was like the left's fault for some reason, even though oftentimes the left isn't in power. Or I mean, the classic tragedy of Western Europe has been all like traditional left-wing parties all basically became neoliberal at a certain point. Like the center left all became neoliberal, and then whatever, you have the further, then they create all these bifurcations. No, now we have these actual left party, and then that actual left party actually split up the three other parties, and like now there's no existence of any left political power in so many of these countries in any like meaningful sense. And so yeah, to me, I think there's something there to contend with. As the left, there is a little bit of a, I mean, for me, I view it like on like a spiritual admission to yourself. Like if you say you want to be part of the left, you are also saying that you are going to be in an adversarial environment. Your political group, you are joining one that is always going to be in an adversarial environment, because the powers that be will do whatever they can to not allow for your political goals to to not come across. And the only way to kind of get there is through a wide range of strategies, that there is not a single strategy or a single thing that we ought to do as the left that will solve all of our problems. Like, that doesn't exist at all. Like, that idea needs to be thrown in the trash. We need to be
Yes,
creating
but
like
smart
much
contracts
more.
are up there. Sorry.
Sure. It can be a part of it. Like, I think smart contracts is super
There is no
interesting, but
magic
I'm not going to
sauce,
tell you.
but there is
Yeah,
such a thing as a better
exactly.
set of priorities.
Sure. But when we're talking about real nitty-gritty, detailed things that we need to be doing, it is both things on the ground, it is talking to people directly, it is building new institutions, it is using the technology that's available to us to create that like technical infrastructure that needs to be autonomous from the existing bourgeois dictatorship institutions that we live under. We need to be able to deal with, and all of these things are incredibly contradictory. We cannot find a pure, like, the purest, goodest way to do left politics. Like, that doesn't exist either. And probably you're going to disagree with other people in the process, and they're going to have different ideas than you, and they may be wrong, and they also may be correct. We should be spending much more time, building the things that we want to see than reprimanding others. I think what a lot of apolitical, or just like people who don't consider them part of the left, who look inside, who peer into the left, and they see what's kind of going on, what they see oftentimes is people being in conflict with each other and not like resolving in a peaceful way or in a productive way. Oftentimes, that's what they
cause
see.
For hope. There's a cause for hope at the level of theory, but not at the level of practice.
Right.
Yeah.
And I think that is true to a varying degree, but it
depends on the country, depends on the era. Yeah.
Depends like so much things on these other things, and varying successes in varying countries. But and I think we need to take that to heart. Like I think we can't be offended by other people perceiving the left as being XYZ, because you can't invalidate like someone else's perception and experience and then also expect them to join you. You have to create a space that is inviting. There needs to be
taking time to listen, and
to take to really answer their concerns and their questions in a way that, of course, and then also doing that in a way that is scalable, because you can't talk to every single individual person, and which is why culture is fairly important in these types of things.
And why smart contracts are so important.
And why
the scale issue is a huge issue. Look, the Romans and the Mongols and whoever you like, it's easy to scale with hierarchies, with militaristic hierarchies. The right has an intrinsic advantage in this respect. If you just bonk someone on the head or threaten them with being fired, it's easy to get people in line. Oh, there goes my headphones. But yes, no. So this is why what you're advocating is so exciting. I do want to let you go, but I just want to briefly respond, if I may.
Sure.
Basically, what I'm doing is I'm echoing Slavoj Žižek's comment that the real moral high ground of kind of true moderation of relatively apolitical people who are broadly committed to the ideals and values espoused by the society that they're living in and feel that their values have been betrayed and not quite sure why. That moral high ground is left open, and it's left open by the right, and the right is increasingly seen by many of its supporters as very hypocritical and inadequate. The center left all the way on through to the right, the whole establishment. And I think the left could do a better job at appealing, again, to not making everything about justice, fairness, empowerment, democracy, and also thinking about these more self-interested, small c conservative concerns of security, personal safety, mutual intelligibility, being able to speak and recognize each other's humanity. That is a lot of what's breaking down in the culture. And we could be exemplars of that. And we need to be, frankly, because the right is not being conservative. They have no conservative answer to the environment. There's no conservative solution to AI. There's no conservative answer to the US-China trade war. If you just want to conserve the present system, forget about justice, forget about socialism. You just want to conserve the present system. You can't support the conservatives. And a lot of relatively apolitical, conservative-minded people are picking up on this. And they say, hey, I at least want, okay, maybe I don't want socialism, maybe I don't want direct democracy, but I want my kids to enjoy the same standard of living that I did. and they don't know why that's gone away. They don't understand. If you come of age in the 70s and 80s, you're still living in the after effect of the so-called golden age of capitalism, 45 to the 70s. You don't yet see the
Mhm.
downturn, the downstream effects of that. And so I think young people in particular, left in general and young leftists in particular, should be less arrogant and more compassionate, and again invite people in, as you say, to a discussion of recent history, which is not lecturing, which is not condescending, which is not too moralistical, but is just a kind of a return to common sense. Because what you're
Mhm.
describing, Joshua, I think it would make for a more beautiful world. I think it would make for a more just and fair world, and it's a world I want to live in. But it's also commonsensical when faced with the climate crisis, when faced with the threats of AI, etc. It preserve it, the kind of institutions you're building with the bread chain cooperative are the kind of thing we need to preserve the rule of law from the threat of technocracy. And my fear
Yeah.
is that the left and the liberals will split like they did 100 years ago, and the more democratic and libertarian aspects of the left will join up with the authoritarian aspects, will support a regime like that in China, which has a lot of positive things going for it, but also has some pretty terrifying things about it, like the social credit system. And yeah, the liberals will sacrifice their liberalism in the name of adherence to capitalist dogmas. They won't understand how technology has changed society, and the left will sacrifice their liberal democratic values in the name of fairness, justice, emancipation, etc. And we end up back in a postmodern 1930s. I really think that's on the cards, although we can't afford such a calamity this time because the scale of the threat is so much greater.